Peace. I wanted to build about knowledge and understanding within the context of relationships to give those of you another perspective on how the mathematics applies to this. And what inspired me to want to share about this is I was thinking about myself as well as other people who I've seen, and I realized that we may not be using the most effective approach when it comes to assessing potential companions. And that is one of the reasons why we may find ourselves in a relationship that is not sustainable, that simply doesn't last. One of the things that I realize is that there's two primary ways that you can assess a potential companion. You can do a summative assessment and you can also do a formative assessment. It's important to use both ways to assess people, but we oftentimes rely on making a summative assessment of who people are. And a summative assessment is just determining who people are based upon the outcomes we see or even their outward appearance. For example, a dude may meet a woman and she may be physically attractive and she's, have curves and, look a certain type of way, this, that, and the third, based upon plastic surgery. And he may get with her based upon making that summative assessment, the outcome he sees right now. He may not even be thinking about the fact that if they have children, those children are not going to look like her plastic surgery. Those children are going to look like what she looked like before she had that plastic surgery, which means that child may not look anything like her. But he may not even be thinking about that because he's just making a summative assessment of who she is. It's the exact same thing with some women. They may meet a dude and just assess him based upon the outcome, what he's wearing right now, the type of job he has right now, where he lives at right now. She may not even think about the fact that he may have gone through something or still may be doing some things for him to look how he looks right now or to work where he works right now. And those processes that he's gone through in order to be where he is right now may become a liability in the long run when it comes to that relationship. But again, that woman may just be making a summative assessment or determining who he is based upon the outcomes, the outward appearance. You can see the liability in that or the shortcoming in just making that type of assessment or taking things on face value when it comes to looking at a potential companion. Now, the other way of assessing people is a formative assessment. A formative assessment is taking the time to evaluate the process, to look at a person through their growth and development and to assess how they process those stages of growth and development and how they have actually arrived at the outcomes that you see right now. That type of assessment gives you more of a sense of what they stand upon or what their principles and values are, because by engaging them in a formative way, you get a sense of how they do things, where, what, when, and what they actually use. Now, I say how, what, when, where, and what they use because all of those type of questions demand concrete responses. If you ask a person why, they can tell you anything. That don't got to be concrete at all. It could be very abstract. Why'd you do this? I don't know. But if you ask a person where, that is a specific geographic location. If you ask them who, that is a specific person. If you ask them what, that is a specific object. If you ask them how, that requires them to explain to you the process they used in order to accomplish something. These ways in which you engage a person is a formative assessment of who they are. And that is more likened or aligned to their foundation, and that is more reflective of knowledge. Because knowledge is the foundation. It gives you a sense of a person's principles as well as their values and ultimately what they stand upon. So if you're asking a person how do they do something, you're going to learn a little bit about their principles and what they value or what's important. If you ask them where, based upon where they choose to go or where they were at, you're going to learn about their principles and values that way too. If you ask them what or when, you're going to learn about their principles and values that way as well. So that is a way that you do more of a formative assessment, or you get a sense of their process and their thought process when it comes to who they are at the core of their being. Now, like I said initially, it's important to do both particular ways of assessing a person, but you can't just simply rely on what the summative is about or what the outcome is, because then you'll be taking things on face value. At the same time, you can't just rely on a formative assessment, because you may get a sense of this is a person's processes or how they're going through things, but they may never arrive at an outcome because this person just doesn't follow through or don't finish things. That is like a person getting with somebody just based upon their potential or what you see them doing. That person could be spinning their wheels. So it's important to do an assessment of a person based upon their formative as well as summative aspect of who they actually are. Because that is the way you're going to know and understand what their culture is. Because knowledge and understanding are 1 and 3 equals 4, and that is culture or your way of life. Your way of life is the sum total of all your people activities. And by doing an effective summative assessment in terms of their outcomes or what you've seen as the goals that they've achieved or their accomplishments, as well as contributions, you're also going to get a sense of what their principles and values are by engaging them in a formative way. Now, all of this shit sounds complicated, right? But it's all distilled back in the form of a process that we traditionally or customarily use called courting. I mean, some of us still use it today. That was something that was very common amongst us in more of our earlier years, especially going back to the baby boomer generation. But a lot of us have lost sense of that, especially in this social media era where you got people on social media that put up this virtual facade of who they are. And people get lured into who this person is supposedly is and create a relationship based upon that. So I will this was inspiring, it was empowering, it was educational, and gave those of you a little bit of insight into knowledge and understanding's relationship to a formative assessment as well as a summative assessment of who people actually are. You can't rely on neither one because there's shortcomings in relying on one way or the other. It has to be a sense of equality in order to get a real idea of who a person is in terms of their principles and values and what they stand on, as well as what the outcomes are. Because sometimes what they stand on may not be reflective of what those outcomes are, and vice versa. What the outcomes are may not necessarily be reflective of what they're standing on. But the only way that you're going to know that is by engaging a person. So, peace.